Hello, my name, is it? Sounds very echoey. Oh, hold on. My name is Linda Lemish. I looked at my tag and it says I have been a member, signed the book since 2013, but I know that I've been here longer than that. I'm just a little bit nervous. Deep breath. I think it's because this is a sacred place. I talk to people every day. I give lectures. I was just in Philly. You know, this is just a little different for me because this is your sacred space, my sacred space. And I have the utmost respect for people here. Okay. Reflection is a funny word, right? Reflection is like an image when you look in a mirror or a lake, and it gives license for a lot of I statements. So I'm going to preface myself by saying there's a bunch of I statements. So I don't want to be so egocentric, but Joe asked me to do a reflection, so that's what I'm going to do. Okay. And I move around a lot. It's very hard for me to stand behind a podium. I don't do that when I teach because I think as much as that gives license to good audio, to me, it puts me at a hierarchy where I don't need to be, and it puts something in the way between me and you. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is namaste. 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 Namaste in Sanskrit, which is a sacred language of Hinduism, literally means I bow to the divine in you. Namaste is a way of showing respect, gratitude, and love towards yourself and other people. Namaste is an opening for me to learn more about you as an individual. Cultural humility is a term used to describe the lifelong process of self-reflection, self-accountability, of learning, and of correcting hierarchical imbalances and inequities. As a Unitarian Universalist, here I am. I know cultural humility indisputably aligns with the former first principle of the belief in the inherent dignity and worth of every person. As an occupational therapist, which is what I am for the last 40 years, don't look at the grays. Let me put this here. Okay. As an occupational therapist, I know cultural humility aligns with our philosophy and practice of client-centered care. Occupational therapists evaluate and treat each patient individually based on their own set of values, their own beliefs, their own spirituality, and their own motivation for getting better. We analyze people's physical and emotional status, their motor skills, their vision skills, their cognitive skills, in order to help them achieve what they want to do and what is meaningful to them. I remember my female patient in Maine. I was there in the fall. She fractured her wrist, and in terms of regaining strength and mobility, I asked her goals, and her goal was to brush her teeth. Pull the trigger. She wanted to go hunting. When I worked in Augusta, Maine, in the fall, I would drive up to the hospital, and in the parking lot, this was no joke, this is me, Linda, from Westchester County, New York, every pickup truck had a dead deer. Oh, yeah. And that was just common. But that was cultural, so we worked on that for her. When I worked in Arizona, I worked with a woman who was a Native American. She had a massive stroke. She was in a wheelchair. Her whole dominant side wasn't working. Her arm was on a lap tray so that it would be supported, so she only had use of this left hand. I asked her what was the most important thing, and she said, I need a cup holder on my wheelchair on the left side for spitting tobacco. That was her individual goals. And I can tell you story after story because I have had the privilege of working across the country for 6 years. As a professor, which I am, there we go. As a professor of occupational therapy, I infiltrate cultural humility wherever I can in all my classes. I voted for the elimination of a course called Cultural Competence in our curriculum. Competence is the antithesis of cultural humility. Competence is a checkoff list that you know everything there is to know about Arabs, about Muslims, about Chinese, about blacks. Check off, you're done, you're competent. No more learning. As an employee of St. Joseph's University, okay, so I put in a little plug in there. Here's me as an employee. I am grateful for the disappearance of cultural competence as one of those annual mandated courses that we all have to take, along with confidentiality, along with fire safety. As an Asian American, maybe you couldn't tell, but that's what I am. Let's put that there. As an Asian American, I have met too many people thinking they know me in their cultural competent ways. The dentist who told me I had plaque buildup, tartar buildup because your people eat rice. Or the audacity of strangers mocking a Chinese accent to me in that sing-sing tone, and I don't even speak Chinese. The men whose perspective of a demure and subservient Asian woman who would be sorely disappointed once they got to know who I am. And the people who think, when I walk into a patient's room, the people who think that I am the nurse's aide or the housekeeper or the dietary person just by my looks. Culture is a group of people with shared beliefs. And in a culture, there's still individual beliefs. You and I are a intersection of many cultures to which we each ascribe. Culture is way beyond just ethnicity and race. My cultures intersect and make up who I am. I belong to these cultural groups of Unitarian Universalists, of professors, of occupational therapists, of St. Joe's employees, and I'm going to add a couple here, Chinese Americans, females, that elite group known as mothers. I belong to the group of daughters. I'm privileged to still have my parents who are 91 and 95. I'm going to put Democrats here. I'm going to put Jeopardy fans over here. That's a culture in and of itself. I'm going to put jazzercisers over here, and Ruth knows that I do that, etc., etc. These are the many cultures that intersect, that make up who I am. The lack of cultural humility in the presidential campaigns was so clear. The marginalization of people, assigning behavioral characteristics to groups of people was evident on both sides, right? So we heard things like border-crossing immigrants labeled as drug dealers, murderers, and pet eaters. That's racism. Or the touting of power over women, that's sexism, and that's misogyny. And the assigning of decline in intellect based on age alone is ageism. Assigning decline in intellect based on word stuttering is ableism. Post-election comments and pundits demonstrate a continued lack of cultural humility. Pointing fingers and blaming loss of Democrats on groups of people is not humble. I have not watched, in full disclosure, any political shows since the election. But the headlines that I read tell me that Latinx, Arab and Muslim Americans, young black males are all targeted groups as the cause for the downfall. As a researcher, here's another cultural group that I belong to. I believe that polls and surveys give information, but polls and surveys facilitate cultural competence and not cultural humility. They are the opinions of those who want to give theirs, and those opinions are then ascribed to the entire group, whatever cultural factor is prevalent or chosen. Do not forget to look at the trees that make up those forests. So, after the hunger and anger dissipate, after I have stopped wearing black clothes in mourning, look, this is gonna be my last day, I choose to live out my values of cultural humility and try as I can to learn more about individuals instead of groups. I am not ignorant in that all people value cultural humility, and with those individuals, a mutual learning conversation is quite limited. Yet, recognizing that all people do not believe in cultural humility is, in and of itself, cultural humility. We are all as individuals as our fingerprints. So let us celebrate the uniqueness of individuals. And thanks for listening to my story.
For what you shared. A trauma is a deeply disturbing and distressing experience that has a profound effect on the physical and emotional person of an individual or a group. I have lived, in the last 8 years, I have lived through 3 what I would call societal traumas. The first was the first election of the current president-elect. The second was COVID, which was like a rolling crisis. And the third was January 6th, during the last attempt for a peaceful transfer of power. I have observed through these experiences and watching individuals in my own family for a long time, that individuals and families respond to trauma, a shock, in many different ways, and that the way in which they respond to trauma and shock has significant and sometimes profound consequences for what happens to that group or that individual. For an example, there were some churches that I knew about that did not make it through COVID. And there were some churches that came through it in a fighting spirit and thrived. And there was a difference in functioning in each type of group in terms of how they responded to crisis. The election that just occurred is, for many of us, a trauma, like the death of a dear loved one or some serious, significant change in our lives, but it is a change that is on a societal level. Resilience is our capacity to respond effectively to a change that poses a major threat to one's mental, physical, and psychological well-being. Resilience is the ability to move from the shock of change to a level of functioning that meets the demands of the moment and of the future. Resilience is not a return to normal, but it is a new normal. Resilience can be viewed on any level: the individual, a community, a church, a family. We can define what resilience is because there's been so much research about it. And we can define what undermines resilience. And therein lies some hope for the present and future. Here's what we know about resilience. First, it is innate. The human species, Homo sapiens, have evolved over the last, existed as a species, we are told, over the last 315,000 years. We have gone through a lot as a species. Resilience is in us. It is innate in us. But we must know that it's there, and we must cooperate with the innate resilience that we have to be able to use it effectively. The first step of resilience, the first characteristic of resilience, is acceptance of the reality of our changed situation. Something has changed. We must face a new reality. That is not passivity, but acceptance. And it can go hand in hand with figuring out how to make things better. But it must be built on acceptance of the reality of what is. The opposite of that, which is deadly, is denial. The next characteristic of resilience is communication. Communication is the super medicine of resilience. It means the ability we have to talk freely about what's on our mind and heart with people who we can trust to be affirming and compassionate, and they with us. The ability to communicate even our deepest fears to others who we trust to hold us in compassion is very, very important. And the opposite of that, which is deadly, is isolation. The next characteristic of resilience, we know through research, is maximizing control of one's life, however and wherever and whenever that is possible. When something happens to us like the election, we feel as though we have been washed over by a historical event that was out of our control, outside of what we would will to happen, and we feel powerless because of that. And that sense of powerlessness adds to the difficulty that we're in. And therefore, part of resilience is to be able to find places in our life where we can once again feel like we are in control of our life and destiny. That might be something as simple as deciding to go for a walk regularly. It might be something as simple as turning off the news and allowing ourselves to be at peace. It might be something as simple as gardening. It might be something as simple as trying to pull every weed in our yard. But it can be something that we feel, once again, that we have a sense of agency. The opposite of that, which is deadly, is a sense of powerlessness. The next component of resilience is a belief in post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth doesn't deny distress, it doesn't deny what has happened, but rather it affirms that adversity, however great, can yield to positive change. Post-traumatic growth was actually identified by two psychologists, Tisch and Calhoun, in the late 1990s. And based on their research, they found 5 categories of growth that occur over time. In other words, they observed that people who had had traumatic events in their life could grow in a positive way in 5 different ways as a result of what happened. The first one was that they found that they forged stronger relationships with loved ones, as well as victims who suffered as they had. Secondly, they were able to cultivate inner strength through the knowledge that they have overcome some tremendous change. Third, they achieved a deeper appreciation for life. Fourth, their relationship to religion and spirituality changed and evolved in a way that led to greater peace. And finally, they recognized and embraced new opportunities. Trauma survivors of whatever kind who want to cultivate growth can strive to process the experience once they have some distance from it. It is not something that can automatically occur, but once we get more and more distance from the trauma, we can begin to cultivate something that is beyond it. The belief that a traumatic experience is intrinsically harmful is a dangerous belief. The belief that the stress that we encounter is something that we can grow from is empowering. If we believe a stressful, traumatic event can only lead to something negative, it's going to have a power over us. The opposite of this, which is deadly, is hopelessness and pessimism. Resilience is what happens when all of us individually and collectively practice these elements and affirm them. Please remember, we can define what resilience is. It is those things I just outlined. And we know what undermines resilience. Knowing these things, we can apply them to our lives and increase our ability to be resilient. History and life is ever-changing. The circumstances that brought us to this point can change. And one way they can change is if people feel renewed and empowered to make the world better. But we cannot do that if we ourselves feel broken and defeated. We must practice resilience to create a new day. As the belief grows that we are capable of being resilient by what we say and by what we do, it affects our lives and those around us, and resilience gets stronger and stronger. I will end by quoting from our board president, who wrote this: "Even in times of uncertainty and turmoil, remember that resilience and hope are the foundations of lasting change. The winds may blow fiercely, but they can also clear the path for new growth. Stay firm, stay true to your values, and know that every small act of courage contributes to a brighter tomorrow. None of us are alone, and together we are stronger." Let us stand, please, for